Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, just the word itself sounds like something that you want to avoid. Tonight, we will take a closer look at what fracking really means and what the controversy is all about. And while others are fracking, we will be tracking stories, including the governor blocking lawsuits, analyzing the past legislative session, and preparing for the hurricane season. On this, the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings, our Future Watch segment looks at the World War II Museum, and we will look at the influence that a locally written book has had in Normandy. Marching with us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Mark Schleifstein, environmental reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Tyler Bridges, reporter, The Lens. First, we're going to go on over to Mark, and the governor did it. He signed a piece of legislation that there was a group of legal scholars, and our own attorney general here in Louisiana said, don't sign this, but he went ahead and signed it. And this is regarding the levee authority lawsuit.
Right. Last July, the levee authority filed a suit against 97 oil, gas, and pipeline companies to try to get them to fix environmental issues that are out in the wetlands outside of the levee system. The governor has not liked that lawsuit. He feels that it violates both state law by being filed by them instead of by him, and also that it has the potential of conflicting with the state's own coastal restoration program. The levee authority looked at it as an easy way of getting oil and gas companies to come to the table and start negotiating about trying to fix some of these things using their money to do it instead of somebody else's, and also potentially putting some money into the levee system in the future to pay for increased heights that might be needed as a result of the loss of wetlands. The legislature approved legislation that the governor asked be put in, and that legislation basically kills the lawsuit. The attorneys, a variety of different, both private attorneys and also law professors from really around the United States. 81 signed this one letter asking Jindal to reject the bill. Their concern is that the way this new law is written, that it has the potential of blocking other local governmental agencies from filing similar sorts of lawsuits for damages that might occur either in the past, might have already occurred in the past, or in the future. And so that's going to be something that is going to play out probably in court.
It's the BP part that's particularly concerning those lawsuits, right?
That's one key thing. There was a concern raised by the law professors that one of the things that this lawsuit could do is foul up a variety of lawsuits that are already out there by local entities, local taxing agencies, like your community group that has a special tax to give you more cops and things like that. These groups have filed suit against BP to get tax money that they contend they lost during the spill. And so that their concern is that those might be in jeopardy.
Well, what's curious here is the state's attorney general office being asked to make a ruling. They make the ruling, and Jindal says, well, our attorneys don't agree. So you got the governor's attorneys versus the state's attorneys.
It's going to be even more complicated because, as Senator Robert Adley pointed out to me, at some point somebody's going to file suit challenging this law. I expect it will probably be the levee authority. And who's going to be defending the state and the law? It's going to probably be the attorney general who's opposed to it. So it's going to be even more complicated as we move forward.
Now, we had some local parishes also file suit against oil companies seeking,
we do, and supposedly those lawsuits are not specifically fouled up by this, but that also remains to be seen. There was a separate piece of legislation that tried to rein in other lawsuits that had been filed, change the way that these lawsuits are called legacy lawsuits, looking at bad practices of oil and gas companies and trying to get things to be fixed. Some changes were made, but the contention is that those laws did not affect those lawsuits.
So basically, all of this is going to be heading to court, one way or the other,
Oh,
lawsuit
absolutely.
or not. Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Okay, Mark. And Tyler, I think, did you have something to say
Yeah,
about this?
the thing that's it's a bit confounding is with all these legal questions out there, and if what these law professors have said, that potentially billions and billions of dollars that the state of Louisiana or branches of the government would be getting if this if the BP lawsuit is messed up by what the governor did today. The question is, well, why did the governor just call a special session, rewrite the bill in a way that would address those concerns, or even wait till next year? Because, you know, there is time. So it's why not come back with a better bill?
Well, the Attorney General also said that he advised not signing the bill right now because he felt it was too vague and too broad.
And John Young, the president of Jefferson Parish, made exactly that argument, saying you've got time before any of these suits actually get through the process in the courts. Take the time to figure out exactly what's going on with the law.
In fact, I know nothing about Buddy Caldwell, the lawyer, or his legal expertise, but he was elected on the platform of not being Charlie Foti. Okay, because if you remember, it was a backlash because of the charity hospital and the prosecution things, and so that's what really propelled him into office. And so he was untested, at least as far as the state is, on these kind of issues.
And also, just a real quick point, this is not to mix this up with the Restore Act funds. That's a whole different pot of money, and this is not going to impact it at all.
Exactly. Those are federal claims under the Clean Water Act, and it's a violation of federal law taken by the federal government. The state will get a portion of that money, but it's by federal law that they'll get that portion, and this will not affect it.
That's BP money related to Deepwater Horizon.
Right.
Let's move on over now to just a quick look at, we just finished this legislative session, an overview. You wrote a piece, and the very last day, the city was trying to get a special taxing district created, and that didn't work out.
Yeah, Mayor Mitch Landrieu had 4 different tax plans he put before the legislature. He only got one of them through. That was the plan that people throughout the state and the metro area will be voting on November 4th. That is whether to authorize an election in New Orleans that would increase or double the millage or the property taxes that go for fire and police services. So it's a complicated process. It has to be first approved by voters statewide and in Orleans Parish, and it has to go to the city council, which would then put the election on the ballot either late this year or early next year. And so again, the voters in Orleans would have to ultimately decide. That's the tax plan that did get through. What didn't get through was an increase in hotel taxes that would have had to go to the ballot before voters. He also wanted to put another tax plan on the ballot, which would have increased cigarette taxes. The legislature did not authorize that election. And the final thing, he was trying to create a special taxing district involving the World Trade Center. That plan also did not move forward with the legislature.
And that would have just dedicated future taxes for something like the World Trade Center or other development just to the city. It wouldn't be shared by the state or any other agencies.
Well, what the final shape is not exactly clear. It never even got a vote before the legislature. But Mayor Landrieu is facing a big budget hole. As he likes to point out, he inherited this problem, but it's on his watch now. He's got to come up with $40 million to pay for 3 court-ordered judgments. So where is he going to get it? And he thought the best plan, at least at this point, were these tax plans.
In every other phase of life, cigarettes have become so unpopular. What argument is made by those who successfully oppose the tax hike for cigarettes?
Campaign contributions, maybe. Well, you had the people who were against it were the cigarette, big tobacco. You had the convenience stores which sell cigarettes. The wholesalers were against it, and there was not, there were strong people against it. There was not strong interest in favor of it, and they couldn't even get that bill out of committee.
So what else, real quickly here, Tyler, if you can just want to quickly sum up what happened and what didn't?
Sure. I think the key issue during the 2014 legislative session was that the governor had a very limited agenda. And as I wrote in a lengthy story for the Lens, he's been spending a lot of time out of the state. And the three things he wanted, as Mark has described, was the bill to kill the levee board lawsuit. He also wanted to crack down on human trafficking. And the third thing he wanted to do was to get some more money for higher education. He didn't really have to break a sweat this session. In fact, we barely saw him in the Capitol. So he got those things. But when the governor doesn't have much of an agenda, not much gets done. So if you're a person who thinks that things are okay, your roads are okay, that the schools are okay, that the public hospitals are okay, then you'd be generally happy with what happened this session. But if you think the state has a lot of problems, or if you're looking at the various rankings where the state is, at the bottom of so many rankings, then I think you would be concerned that not much got done.
Got done, except this piece of legislation that was signed to try to throw out the lawsuit,
And that
the
will
levy
now
authority
be,
lawsuit.
That will now be in court. And I got to say, just one last thing is, I think the governor's, he's rolling the dice. Maybe billions and billions of dollars will be lost to the state if he has made the wrong decision.
Yeah, that's what opponents of this legislation say, but of course the governor and his supporters say that's just not the case. We've thought about this legislation and that won't happen. We shall see. Mark, back over to you. Fracking is a very, very controversial thing before, certainly right now, the people in St. Tammany, they are letting their opinion be firmly known. They want it banned outright. What is it? Explain what it is. What's the problem? What is good about it?
Well, fracking is what they call a new technique for getting oil and natural gas out of rock structures deep underground. The idea is that traditional drilling, you go down and you find a pool of oil or a pool of gas and you hit it and you pump it out. With fracking, what happens is that you're actually trying to find a particular kind of rock called shale that has molecules of oil and gas in the rock, and you want to break up that rock so that the molecules are released so that they can then be moved to the surface. And so what happens is you go down a hole and then you go sideways out into this layer of shale, and then you set off little explosions and you push a liquid through that area to sort of shove out all the oil and gas. So the concerns there are, what happens when you do that? And there are a number of concerns. The first one is a concern that actually all oil and gas production has, and that is, how do you make sure that none of the oil and gas or any of the materials, these chemicals that you're using to free this from the rock, how do you make sure it doesn't get out into the surface water or into groundwater that is used for drinking? And so the question, that's one of the key questions that's going on right now over in St. Tammany Parish, is there are real concerns about that because a lot of the groundwater is used for drinking. The other issue that's been raised recently about fracking is that it has the potential to set off earthquakes. Small quakes in many cases, but there is some indication by some recent studies by the U.S. Geological Survey that some of these sort of rolling rounds of earthquakes that have been occurring in Arkansas and Oklahoma may actually be the result of fracking operations and increased amount of pumping from this area and just setting off these different formations.
Meanwhile, in northwest Louisiana, you have a lot of people making money in Haynesville with the Haynesville shale.
Indeed, and one of the ironies about what's going on in Haynesville, as opposed to, say, what's happening in Pennsylvania, where there has been basically a very large public outrage about the way that fracking has been going on. The Haynesville rock that is being targeted is about 12,000 feet.
That is being fracked?
That's being fracked. It's actually about 12,000 feet below the surface, so it's way below. And what has been happening is that there were some problems initially because these operations take a huge amount of water to be operated. And the original operations up in the northwest Louisiana, they went out and took all this water out of the groundwater area so that people's wells went dry. And the state said, you can't do that. We're going to pass a friendly rule that says, don't do that anymore, guys. And they listened. That's the sort of thing that's also a concern in St. Tammany.
I was talking to a lawyer from Shreveport, and I asked him, sort of in jest, what's driving your economy in Shreveport now? And he says, people from Haynesville coming to town and spending money.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up our fracking conversation right now and move on over to the World War II Museum. This is the 70th anniversary of D-Day.
Well, and as you know, that museum started 14 years ago as the D-Day Museum. It started because of this day 70 years ago and the Higgins boat, which was made here in New Orleans, which was credited with perhaps winning the war. 10 years ago, the museum received the congressional charter to become the National World War II Museum. And ever since then, before that, there's been a master plan to actually achieve full status and be the story of the American experience, both in Europe and in Asia, and the whole experience of the war. This December, the Campaigns of Courage pavilions are opening, and this is a new pavilion between the original museum and Andrew Higginson Camp, that corner. And this pavilion is 31,000 square feet. It's supposed to really show the experience both environmentally, the cold, the deserts, the mountains, the experiences. There are oral histories and artifacts, but one thing that the museum is changing, there's now in the Louisiana Pavilion, you can get on a simulated train ride, because as everybody went off to war back then for World War II, they would have ridden a train to wherever they reported for duty. And then on that train, there will be a screen in front of you, and on the screen you can select a branch of service, and you can select a theater of fighting and pick your person. There are 50 real people to follow their story through the museum. And the museum says, being interactive is how they're really attracting young people to the museum. And they're seeing people in record numbers. Last year, they topped 400,000 visitors for the year. They say they're on pace this year to be over 500,000 visitors. 85% of the visitors are from outside the state of Louisiana. So it really, I think people laughed at first, perhaps, when they said, the World War II Museum is going to attract tourists to New Orleans. It's working. It is happening. In this master plan, the last major pavilion will be the Liberation Pavilion, which will kind of finish the whole story of the war, the liberations at the different camps, and then a canopy of peace will tie all the pavilions together, and the whole thing's expected to be finished in 2017.
It's just quite magnificent, and it's more than a day visit.
Well, I said, with all of this now, can people come and do the museum in a day? And the average visitor still only stays for 2.5 to 3 hours. But then there are visitors who go in. If you were to go in and read everything, and try to experience everything, there is no way you can do the museum in a day's time. It's a day and then part of a second day visit. So it really, really, really has become very successful. You also, when you do that virtual thing and select a soldier, you get virtual dog tags, digitized dog tags that go with you and tell you this story. So it's a real good way, because the generations that are visiting now, if my children go, they have a great-grandfather who they never met, who was involved in World War II. They have no personal connection anymore.
So it really is directly engaging
It is
visitors.
engaging the youth who didn't have any other way to learn about it.
With this history and it's amazing how this has grown. It was an idea of Nick Mueller, who is the director,
And Stephen Ambrose.
And Stephen Ambrose, Dr. Stephen Ambrose, and it has just become such an amazing museum now for this region and really for the world to enjoy. Errol, you actually did take a trip to Normandy, you and Peggy, your wife, Peggy Scott Laborde. And
well, my dad was at D-Day, not the first day, thank goodness, but I think he arrived the second and third day, and he was there through the Bulge. So I'd always wanted to go in that area, and so last summer we did. I wasn't sure whether to call it a vacation or a pilgrimage, but I was so glad to be in the area. A few things that struck me. We knew about Stephen Ambrose's influence in New Orleans with the D-Day Museum, but you'd be touring around and you'd stop at this cow pasture where this battle took place, and you'd see a sign, and you'd see another sign explaining what happened. And the explanation was an excerpt from Ambrose's Band of Brothers. and there'd be several places that you'd go and you'd see signage about Band of Brothers explaining. It made me realize how terribly important that book is. It's very important because there's this whole generation of people that what they know about the war, at least the war in Europe from Normandy through the end of the war, they know from having either read the book or having seen the HBO series, and what a huge impact that's had, and that's probably doing a lot to drive people that are coming there. Even in our tour bus, like between destinations, that was showing excerpts from the film, and so it's just had a huge impact. You know, the stories about a part of the 101 Airborne, and kind of follows their exploits. At some points, it's very hard to watch because it's very realistic, but I just realized with enormous impact. But you know, 20 years ago, when it was the 50th anniversary of D-Day, I was told at that time Ambrose was in his prime. He was all the cable channels had started. They were doing all these documentaries. He was one of these talking heads you saw on every show. So he was a celebrity in that world, and somebody who was there that day told me that Ambrose was like Eisenhower. I mean, you know, he was a person everybody else is following, and so that book came out in. Well, the TV series started in 2001. Unfortunately, it started on September 9, 2001, 2 days before September 11th. Yeah. And then after that, there was this time when people just weren't wanting to be hearing about wars for the longest period of time. But it's been able to come back and to develop a following. And of course, the book is important too. A lesser book, but also by somebody who was living and working in New Orleans, is Doug Brinkley, who wrote a book called The Boys of Pointe du Hoc. And Pointe du Hoc is this elevated area right off of Omaha Beach where a group of Rangers had to climb to knock out what they thought was some German guns there in place. A lot of them were killed in the process. It was very, very heroic with what they had to do. That they ran into all kind of problems. And Doug Brinkley wrote a book about that. But historically, I think he developed an important point, because what happened in '84 for the 40th anniversary, Ronald Reagan, who was president, went there, and as Brinkley explains, we know what a great speaker that Reagan was, and he thought that America was in a funk, that it really wasn't believing in itself then. So he used Pointe du Hoc with a speech written by Peggy Noonan, who was a star writer, to talk about, you know, these brave young men in climbing, to really try to develop Americanism. And he was very effective at it, and really built a spirit. So anyway, the point is that there were two historians working out of New Orleans, and at one time, Brinkley was a protege of Stephen Ambrose, who have done some really important work in documenting the war.
And certainly now here in New Orleans, the World War II Museum, where you can learn more about the war, about D-Day, and as Don was explaining, really engage the younger generation. It's
special celebrations tomorrow, too, today and tomorrow, to honor the 70th anniversary.
Thank you both. Back over to Mark quickly. We have a few minutes where we can talk about, it is now, hate to say it, hurricane season. How protected are we?
Well, the reality is that we have in place around the metropolitan New Orleans area a state-of-the-art system to reduce the risk to our housing. And it's a place that, you know, it's a good place to begin our evacuation from. And as long as we understand that that's what the purpose is, that it's to reduce our risk, it's not to protect us, because it can't do that. It is a lesser than needed level of protection for the metropolitan area. Mm-hmm. It's only a 1% chance of, you know, it protects us from storm surges caused by hurricanes that have a 1% chance of occurring in any year. That so-called 100-year storm that has a chance of occurring once in the lifetime of your mortgage. Mm-hmm. That's a good way of looking at it. So this year, the National Hurricane Center is issuing a new storm surge map that is very vivid colors and will make it very clear when there is risk involved to communities along the coast. So that should help out quite a bit.
As we really saw with Isaac, where that was, quote, a minor storm,
but
those maps,
if those maps had been there for Isaac, we would not have had a lot of the problems that we had during Isaac with people not understanding what was about to happen. They would have been able to see that they were in a red zone that was going to flood by 5 to 6 feet.
But every hurricane, I guess, gives us more information that we then learn, or the experts learn, to help us better prepare for the next one, right?
That's very true, and there's actually quite a bit of research that's going on right now by the Hurricane Research Division into new ways of, especially dealing with intensity of storms.
Was there a call with, I think it was Isaac, it came in as only a Category 1, but it stalled.
Sat.
It didn't
It
leave.
sat and spun.
So that's the
Right.
problem. If they just moved, it would have been
Exactly,
okay.
and the problem was that basically it's like you've got a pump working that just keeps pumping water up into Lake Pontchartrain, and it's all going to the western part of Lake Pontchartrain. And the same thing was happening in Plaquemines Parish, in the areas that got overtopped there.
Right.
And there you had levees that were not these brand new modern levees that meet the modern national designs to protect from those smaller storms as well.
How complete is this risk reduction system? And that's
It's-
what it is.
it's
It is a
complete.
risk reduction system.
That system is complete. There are areas that are outside that levee system, though, that are still a problem. St. Tammany Parish this year had legislation passed through the legislature to set up its own levee district because it is concerned that it's being left behind in just those sorts of issues, getting some sort of new protection for them.
But the outfall canal pumps, though, those are not the permanent pumps, right?
We still have the temporary pumps in place. The permanent pumps are under construction. The temporary pumps are fine. They have the same level of protection as the permanent pumps will.
don't
Don't
have
pump
all
as
the
much
bells and
water
whistles.
out.
Yeah.
But the permanent ones will be finished by the beginning of 2017.
The bottom line is make your evacuation plan. Just pay
Absolutely.
close attention to what's going on. All right, looking ahead. Errol.
Well, if I can use a little privilege here, instead of looking ahead, just a reminder, and that is, as we talk about D-Day, remember that to the extent that war can be glamorous, the European war was glamorous compared to the Pacific. In that, the European war, you had France and you had England, you had Paris, and the Pacific, you had guys in boats going from one godforsaken island to the other, fighting a fanatical enemy that didn't honor the Geneva Convention. And so, as much as we honor the guys in Europe, just remember the people in the Pacific, because they really had it bad.
Yeah, well said. Mark.
Well, I'm going to get back to hurricanes, and I'm going to say that this is the weekend that families should be sitting down and making plans on what they plan to do when an evacuation is called. Now is the time to decide when I'm going to evacuate, who I'm going to go pick up, and where I'm going to go. Get it done now. That way you have that out of the way when the evacuation is called.
Thanks, Mark. Don.
Just to reiterate, those new Campaigns of Courage pavilions are opening, the European one this December, the Pacific one in the fall of next year.
All right. Tyler?
Come back to Bobby Jindal. He's in South Carolina tonight, which will be an important primary state if he happens to be running for president. He's going to be in North Carolina tomorrow, and he's got more trips upcoming. I think he is running for president, by the way.
Do you think so?
You know,
You kind of have that feeling that he might
many
be
years of
saying
covering
that.
Louisiana politics and national politics has led me to that conclusion.
All right. I thank you guys very much for joining us this evening, and I thank you guys so much for watching us. And certainly, we hope you'll join us again next week for Informed Sources. Have a very good weekend, and take a trip to the World War II Museum. Be a good weekend to do it. Good night.